All right, thank you. Those were three very informative and interesting presentations. We now have about half an hour for Q&A, so if you have a question, please identify yourself and your organization, and try to keep your question relatively brief so we can get to everyone who has a question. All right, front row.
Just like to ask everybody to speak into the microphone for the camera.
Hi, Corinne Lepier from IESC. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your potential use of diaspora in your programs, or if you're not, why not? Or
It's a really good question. We have actually started reaching out to various diaspora. Actually, we started reaching out to diaspora for even before all of these changes had started happening. But we're also looking at ways that we can actively engage diaspora. There's several different organizations that have come to us in the last several months saying that they have various programs that they're going to be implementing where they're looking at bringing doctors back in or other qualified professionals. In my past experience with other countries that I've worked on where diaspora have come back, especially after having been gone for a very long time, there's an adjustment period that they're not always able to successfully manage. So I think we're going to just play that cautiously and make sure that we don't have diaspora that are going and say doctors and then they get to Rangoon and find that they're not able to actually, because they're used to working with incredibly high-tech machinery and equipment here in the United States or wherever else, and then go there and they don't have that kind of access. And that's been an issue in other countries. So.
Over here.
I'm Chris Farron with the Lewis Berger Group, and thank you all for the insight. My question relates to private investment. I didn't see a lot. I realize that the challenges are plentiful, but wondering what efforts are being made to also assist in attracting private investment in Burma as the sanctions lift. And then I guess a follow-on to that is if you have any insight as to what the process is for U.S. Treasury to actually officially lift the sanctions to allow U.S. companies to invest in work in Burma.
Okay. From our perspective, private investment is something that we're very interested in as well. Right now, there is no process for companies that are interested in Burma to engage in an appropriate manner. So the secretary has actually, when she made her comments, when some of the sanctions were the investment ban, and she encouraged companies to go in and invest responsibly. We're looking at putting together some kind of something to help companies that want to come in and manage that process and help them with that. As far as Treasury goes and the OFAC sanctions, I can't really speak to that because that's a different agency, but they do have a website that has all of their sanctions. Sanction 14C, the latest update, the OFAC license 14C, is the one that really covers a lot of humanitarian assistance and things and other issues, and it's actually quite liberal in what you can do and what you cannot do. So I'd suggest that you take a look at that. Sure. I have a copy of it here if you'd like.
I actually have two questions for the panel. One is directed towards sort of the implementing agencies, the INGOs, and then the others to the big donors. And they're both sort of questions about caution. In a sense, you've raised the challenges internally. What are the challenges? We all know what they are, sort of ethnic violence, corruption, capacity, but it's all sort of been placed the impediments to change on the Burmese. And I would just sort of put out there for an argument and just see how you respond that there are lots of examples in Asia where the international community has also played a less than constructive role in helping to rebuild societies and helping to address all these problems. And so the question for the two big bilateral aid agencies is, are we talking about way too much money too soon for a country like Burma? You said $100 million from the Australians, $38 million from the U.S., the EU, and other countries in the European Union are talking about huge amounts of money. Japan is talking about huge amounts of money. And every time you talk about these things, you also reflect on the lack of institutional capacity inside the country. So the question for you is it too much money too soon in Burma? And what will the impact of that be? And the question for Tristan and Crown Associates and other implementing agencies is, as you begin to engage in Burma, and again, you also reflected on the capacity challenges, and we can talk about that. I'm not sure I fully understand exactly what the issue is. But the question is, how do you begin to implement your programs in a responsible manner, given what you've identified as a lack of indigenous capacity to implement programs as you think they should be implemented?
Can I start?
Sure.
Yeah, I think, the volume of aid or volume of or the development, it can be a kind of big bang. It needs to be a gradual approach, and as you pointed out, if a lot of money is provided to Myanmar, even though their capacity to utilize that money efficiently and effectively is not enough, that money cannot be kind of useless. So the volume and also the kinds of or nature of assistance has to be devised so that it can go with the development of Myanmar's development capacity. That's very much, I think, important. But I also feel we have to be very cautious about this move be continued. But at the same time, both governments and people need to see the tangible benefits. Some kind of quick win type of thing needs to be seen by the people and the government so that they can keep their incentives to go ahead.
Thank you.
I agree with Nakazawa-san, but I'm also I worked on Afghanistan for a very long time, and my starting budget there right after September 11th was $33 million, right? And when I left that portfolio, we had a budget of 1.5 billion. Okay. And that really does give me a lot of concern because we've had a budget of about $38 million for Burma over the last 4 years now, which has been exactly what we needed to do our programs, and I think it was a moderate amount. Yes, there's lots of parts of the country where there's a lot of unmet need, but then again, it's really hard for us to be everything to everybody as well. I mean, which is where the donor coordination piece comes in, and I think what we're doing now is working very closely with the Australians and with DFID and with JICA to look at what parts we have a comparative advantage in, what sectors where we are able to work. The Australians, for example, are really very interested in working in education, and they have a very strong comparative advantage there. So that's not something that we are going to be working in. Though our education team at USAID is, why aren't we doing education? We should be doing education. Yes, we understand that, but the Australians are doing that, and that's what the donor coordination process does. So I think it's something that we do need to be mindful of.
All right. Tristan?
It's a very interesting question, and one that we raised with our participants on our course, and there is very much a concern from them that both with the private sector coming in, international aid donors coming in, that there will be competition for their staff. So for the capacity that they've built internally, whether or not that's been externally supported or not, there is a concern that people will try and move that resource. And I think there's also a concern that they have that civil society organisations will not necessarily be used in a kind of a true sense of partnership, but there is the threat and the challenge there to be abused, for want of a better word. So I think for people entering into the country, I think it's very important that true partnerships are established, that there is an awareness of the skills and the enthusiasm that is there, and that is supported in partnership, that the capacity is also supported in its development at the same time. So I think this is crucial. I would perhaps say that there are some organisations within the country that have been there for many years, and they have very good, strong capacity. There's a lot of other organisations that are very new and very fragile, and they really need to be nurtured and supported in their development and their ability, either in terms of implementing or in advocating for policy change.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Over here, please.
Tom Timberg, consultant. This question of capacity is to some extent connected with the whole network of relations that a country has with the outside world. You know, just some are referred to diaspora, investments. The official aid is normally a relatively small part of that. In the donors meeting and in your planning, has there been some, again, and you talked about U.S. aid assisting investors. That's great. But there's OPEC, there's the Department of Commerce, Treasury, etc. To what extent has the United States government, on a coordinated basis, been looking at, if you will, opening up Myanmar, Burma, and its potential, and more generally the donors? Again, with the Japanese, I mean, yes, the government, but they're the corporations, they're the universities, there's researchers, they're people who produce little things so you can see the Shwedagon thing. So this is really a question for everybody about what about the broader, beyond your particular bilateral aid functions, opening up of Burma?
Well, from the U.S. government perspective, we are very, very, very well coordinated because we have, and it's been in existence for since Cyclone Nargis actually. It's called the Burma Assistance Working Group, the BOG, the BAWG, and we have regular meetings, usually at 8 o'clock in the morning, every other Wednesday or so, and we loop in the embassy in Rangoon, so everybody's all on the same page, and it's a video conference. And it really pulls together all parts. There's USAID represented, the various funding arms of branches of the State Department, including the State Desk and the Bureau for East Asia and Pacific. We have Treasury, we have the White House, so everybody who has a voice or needs a voice as far as U.S. policy towards Burma is represented in that, and so it's a joint decision-making body. And any issues or any programs or anything else that we're going to be doing, we always float up through that just to get policy concurrence. And this was quite important previously because of the sanctions and because of all the other issues that Burma had. So this is something that's been it's been a very useful mechanism for all of us to coordinate with. But as far as the other people, like the universities and things like, there have been several universities that have their own mechanisms to go out. I know Johns Hopkins has done a lot of work directly with the Ministry of Health. There's others that have been reaching out to other ministries. Yes, I think at some level it's very important to coordinate a lot of that, but also we as the U.S. government are not necessarily always able to regulate what private individuals are able to do as well. So it's something that we're watching and we're trying very hard to be mindful of. At this point, pretty much everybody who is heading out to Burma somehow finds my phone number and they give me a call. So, you know, I feel like I'm the de facto clearinghouse. But yes, it's something that we are watching.
If I looked back in 1980s in Thailand or Malaysia, you know, Japanese government provided a lot of assistance for the Thailands and Malaysias, you know, to increase their capacity, training, not only social type of assistance such as you know, education and health, but also some infrastructure for economic development. And after 1985 Plaza Agreement, after the highly, you know, yen was, you know, highly appreciated, Japanese private company decided to move their offices, factories to Thailand and Malaysia. So for the Japanese private companies' investment, it's very important for the government, not necessarily first, but at least together with the private sectors, go to nurture the good relationship with the recipient government also and with recipient people. So I think for Myanmar, even though not like the U.S., we didn't have kind of legal type of sanctions, but still, you know, a Japanese company didn't make investment in Myanmar because you know, Japanese government and also the international society didn't encourage those companies or private sectors coming into Myanmar under the military government. So I hope that kind of, you know, discipline also works in Myanmar. But at the same time, as Nitin also pointed out, like the case of universities, civil societies, and NGOs, I think having a lot of different networks can be also, you know, very much strength, rather than the, you know, sometimes of course it's will increase the transaction cost and may occupy, you know, may be harmful for, you know, if we think about the limited capacity of Myanmar's government and also society. But at the same time, having a lot of different networks, you know, can be, you know, as I mentioned, strength. So the question is how Myanmar people and government and external donors like ours, you know, carefully, you know, manage the kind of development with or networks of development or development of networks, which is important for the development of Myanmar.
We have a question here in the green.
My name's Jack Evans. I'm a retired individual, happily married to a Burmese woman who I was able to persuade to remain part of the diaspora rather than returning. We've read, I think, recently of some announcements by the government of a desire to see the growth rate at perhaps quite a high rate, probably an increase from what it's been, although what confidence we have in the level of statistics and how we really measure. But as a result, one would think that they might well be looking to the aid donors group to play some significant role in helping relieve any of a number of the constraints to that growth, and whether in fact they've been able to identify some of the things that they want most from you folks in that regard, so that they're helping channel. And then the question is, with the sanctions perhaps being lifted for a year, many people may be hesitant to do too much with only a year's horizon. So what is it that you folks want done so that the horizon can be more than a year? And what do they want from you to help with this more rapid growth? Thank you.
Okay. That's a difficult question to answer, partly because we do not work with the government of Burma. It's very clearly written into our authorization language that we cannot work with the SPDC or its successor governments, right? So we are looking for other partners to work with. We have been able to, so we cannot fund them, right? There's no way that we transfer any funding or assistance to the government. But the one area that we have been able to make an exception on humanitarian and basically a national security principle was with the Ministry of Health, because of the disease and the possibility of transmission back to the United States or to other parts of the world. So as far as our assistance, I think we are trying very hard to just make sure that the basic needs of the people are met in most cases. We're working very hard, and our focus is really on the Burmese people and not on the government, not on how we can help the government in that respect. I think Nakazawa-san was correct when he said earlier that there does need to be some short-term gains that the people can actually see, so that they have kind of a vested interest in what the transition offers and what that potential could be. So I think what we'd like to do is try to support that process as best as possible. Yes, we see it's only 1 year long for that the sanctions have been waived at the moment, and they haven't been completely lifted. However, if things continue at the current trajectory, there will be a second year and a third year and a fourth year, and hopefully an eventual complete lifting of those sanctions. But we remain cautiously optimistic.
I think economic development and economic growth is very much necessary for the people of Myanmar and the government, so that Myanmar people can get a fair share of the dividends of democratization and social and economic reform currently taking place. And the workshop which I mentioned, which JICA conducted in last December and February, as I mentioned, 30 Myanmar government officials and private sector representatives visited Japan and had been lectured, and also visited many factories, agricultural firms, stock exchange market, so that they can also work in Myanmar to apply what they learn from Japanese experience and Japanese experience of other neighboring countries in ASEAN region, so that they can apply it in the current Myanmar's context to achieve healthy economic growth. And as I mentioned, we also decided to support the Tirawara SEZ, Special Economic Zone, and try to, for the Myanmar government, try to invite, foreign investors to make investments, generate jobs, and achieve some economic development, including, export to other countries. And in order to achieve that kind of, economic growth, many things, in fact, are very much necessary. Not only infrastructure, not only capacity development, but also like a legal system, needs to be, improved. So yes, there are a lot of things need to be done, and it can be done, in a very short period. So we have to carefully think what kind of short-term gains we can deliver, and what kind of long, struggle, long challenges we have to take care from now on, and for making long-term engagement or commitment by all parties involved in that process.
I would just add to that. I think there's another piece of this question that hasn't been addressed, which is the concern that we've been hearing, and I think it's well founded, is that if the liberalization process moves too quickly, it doesn't address all of the challenges you've noted, and it simply benefits the cronies who have been the basic beneficiaries of this system. In fact, it will undermine any of the political process moving forward. And so when you talk about the lifting of sanctions in Burma, the concern really is, yes, that's sort of if it's done appropriately, if it's done in a manner that continues to provide the leverage which it had been intended in from the beginning, and if the infrastructure is in place, not just the physical infrastructure, the legal operating environment, the capacity building, a free and transparent bidding process, all of these different types of institutions which are essential to a free market system that actually benefits the people, you cannot do this in 1 year. And so in a sense, my concern is when we're thinking about Burma, you cannot provide economic relief to the people in the short term without fundamentally addressing these shortcomings. And it's a famous quote. Whether or not it's actually accurate, I don't know. I've been looking to see it. But Lee Kuan Yew was once reported to have said Burma has basically combined the worst two forms of government, socialism and military governments. And the effect of that has been that you've had a military state built on socialist principles. And to undo that is not a short-term proposition. And so when we're looking forward to both investment, international engagement, donor presence, INGOs, everyone else operating in Burma, one of the fundamental challenges, in my opinion, is going to be how do you do this in a manner that does not lead to the disasters we've seen in other countries where you liberalize and you sell off state-owned assets, but you sell them off to cronies at a penance. The state doesn't benefit, and then you simply reinforce the structures that are in place in the country. So what you see in Burma now has not been a revolution. It has not been a democratic revolution. It's been, in essence, a top-down, government-driven process away from extreme authoritarianism. Where it's going, we don't know, but it's also, I think, fundamental to remember that you cannot just liberalize this economy, encourage international investment in business without recognizing who benefits from the current system, who's likely to benefit in the transitional period, and who's in a position to take advantage of these corporations coming in. So I'm not trying to sort of be pessimistic to the degree of saying international business should not be looking into Burma. They clearly are, clearly in the extractive industries in particular. Telecommunications, there are a few sectors that are very obvious places for investment. But we need to be very careful looking at, and I know the U.S. government has been doing this, there's still sanctions lists, there's still lists of people who have been involved with past abuses in the country who are likely beneficiaries of all of this type of investment, and that has got to be central to our engagement in the country if we don't want to undermine any political process that can be made. All right, that's just my 2 cents. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions, so why don't we do in the front? Can we do 3? We could go over for a few minutes. So we'll do these 3 in the front here.
Hi, I'm Melanie Weniger here with the Global Development Network. My question is for Mr. Nakazawa. In your presentation, you mentioned that the Japanese government will be undertaking research and doing some studies as well as local institution capacity building with the Myanmar government. And I was wondering if you could speak more to that. Are there any particular research institutions that you will be working with, or what is the focus of these studies that you mentioned earlier?
Take questions? Or?
Yeah, why don't we, since we're around, why don't we take these 3 questions at once, then we can each answer quickly. Yeah, right there.
Hello, my name is Sofia Benali. I'm from ISC, and my question is for the donors. What are your areas of comparative advantage?
Question. And in the front here.
I'm Jack Andre from Nathan Associates. I just wanted to ask about Burma and ASEAN. Burma's hosting ASEAN, big political spotlight on the country in 2014. ASEAN communities coming hopefully into existence 2015 with lots of commitments by the member governments for democracy, human rights, economic reform, and social and humanitarian commitments. What is the possibility for using Burma's and other countries' commitments to address some of the impediments and the principles that you are pursuing in Burma?
Thank you. Why don't we start at my far left and take your pick of which of those questions you'd like to take a crack at, and we'll move down the aisle.
Can I come back?
Yes, of course. Didn't you want to?
Sure. So our comparative advantage, basically, at least as far as Burma goes, would really be the areas that we're currently working in now, which is health, democracy, civil society building, and also the humanitarian assistance programs that we have that include microfinance and livelihoods. So that's our immediate. As far as the ASEAN question goes, we're all very excited about it, and we're working very closely with our advanced project that you all run. And we're looking to see how best we can support both Burma and have that meet its needs as far as ASEAN goes. I think there's a period of really great excitement but then I also get the sense from the Burmese that they have a little bit of a deer in the headlights look of, oh my God, we've signed up for this, and how are we going to make this all work? So I think that this is a huge opportunity for us to step up to the plate and help them also look good. So I think that it could be quite interesting as things progress. But I think that also the other ASEAN member nations are also very committed to this process. I know the Indonesians are very engaged. The governor of Brunei is also looking forward to doing English language training across the entire Southeast Asia, the Mekong region, and I know Burma is one of their focus countries as well. So I think that there's increasingly a lot more understanding from the part of the ASEAN countries, and the Burmese are also very willing to accept the help.
As for the advantage we have toward Myanmar, I think one is our relationship with the government. Myanmar's government. As Nitin pointed out, U.S. government has a kind of constraint because of sanctions to work with the government, at least at this moment. And JICA has kept our independent office probably as only one as a bilateral donor in Rangoon for the last 2 decades. And as I explained some examples of our assistance in health sector and also about the disabled sign language project. For those projects we also worked with Myanmar's government. So the kind of trust with the bureaucrats of the Myanmar government, I think, would be the very big asset which we have. And as for sectors, some infrastructure sectors, for example, which we had a lot of experience in neighboring countries, including Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Thailand, might be another asset which we can deliver based upon the experience, some bad lessons or failed projects. Also can be, I think, assets which, when we think about the Myanmar's development in that ASEAN's Mekong region's context. And as for studies, I mentioned several studies, including like Myanmar Japan Center for Human Resource Development and Baruchan No. 2 hydropower plant rehabilitation and so on. I will give you some details probably later on, because it's related to, there are several studies which we have already started and we are planning to start. And probably what you'd like to know is whether I'm not quite sure whether any kind of chances of collaboration or involvement of the American NGOs or local NGOs. That kind of question probably I will answer separately.
Let me, those 3 interesting questions. On the question of comparative advantage, it's actually interesting. Your answer is exactly the same as mine, but for the exact opposite reason, which is our comparative advantages. We've sort of been unapologetic about our support for democratization in Burma. We've been deeply engaged for over 20 years now, working with civil society, underground political organizing, the trade unions, all of these people inside the country, and for exactly the same reason that JICA has a well-established relationship with the government that allows it to move forward and advance its agenda. We're in the same position, but much more with the civil society and sort of actively identified democracy community. On the question of ASEAN, there are just a few points. One is, it is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, isn't it 825 meetings of at least the deputy ministerial level or above. And so for Burma to literally host a year-long series of meetings at that level will tax the government. It will expose the government to international organizations, to international press. It will expose its ministers in all different sectors to its counterparts in the region. My personal sense is that ASEAN's strength is in the economic integration sphere. When people talk about its human rights and democratizing effect and how that is part of the agenda of ASEAN, although it is increasingly part of the agenda of a subset of the countries in ASEAN, it's really not the agenda of the institution as a whole. I mean, if you look at ASEAN now, there's one and a half, maybe 2.5 if you're very sort of soft in your definition of democracies. Of the 10 countries in the region, less than a third, right? Less than 30% are democracies or even aspiring democracies. So it's not really part of their agenda, but I do think there is the effect of these other countries are much more integrated into the global community. They tend to have more liberal, certain sectors of the country are more liberalized, their education sectors, some of their investment sectors are more liberalized, and all of that interaction with Burma will have a tremendous effect and impact on its bureaucrats. And I'll just give you a quick anecdote. I was just in Norway, and I was meeting with some people from the Ministry of Information, which was fascinating that they were willing to meet with me publicly and openly. And their openness and receptivity to talking to me, somebody from the National Endowment for Democracy who had been very open about supporting democratization in Burma for 20 years, and they were simply interested in ideas, interaction, exchange. And you see inside this bureaucracy, inside the military bureaucracy itself, there are a huge number of people who simply want to engage in the world. And I think the ASEAN meetings will have that effect more than any explicit holding them accountable to democratic norms and practices, which simply aren't the norms and practices in ASEAN. All right. We've actually gone over our time by 10 minutes, but if we can all join in welcoming and thanking our three speakers.